They demolished my family's 60-year-old lake cabin while I was deployed overseas, all because some HOA psychopath decided I owed $847 in made-up fees for dock improvements that never happened. I'm talking about a cabin my Korean War veteran grandfather built with his bare hands, where 3 generations learned to fish, where I proposed to my wife, where my kids took their first swimming lessons. Gone. Bulldozed into splinters while I was serving federal warrants in Detroit. The smell of diesel fuel mixing with sawdust from my grandfather's hand-carved mantelpiece still makes my blood boil. But here's what this power-drunk HOA president didn't know when she was filming herself celebrating the demolition she'd just destroyed federal property belonging to a family where everyone carries badges: DEA, ATF, Coast Guard intelligence, and FBI cybercrimes. Big mistake, Vivian. What would you do if petty tyrants demolished your family legacy? Drop a comment from wherever you're watching, especially your own HOA horror stories. Let me paint you the full picture of what we lost that day, because this wasn't just some weekend getaway. This was 3 generations of American family history. My name's Marcus Thornfield, and I'm a 42-year-old FBI special agent specializing in cyber crimes. Just got back from an 18-month deployment helping track down international hackers targeting our financial systems. The cabin on Pine Lake, Michigan, that was our family's anchor, our North Star. My grandfather, Samuel Thornfield, built that place in 1963 with lumber he cut himself and nails he bought with his Korean War disability payments. Every board hand-selected, every joint crafted to last forever. The musty scent of old pine logs mixed with lake water, that was the smell of home. Dad, a Detroit police detective for 30 years, added the screened porch where we'd play cards during thunderstorms and the dock where he taught me to tie proper knots. I modernized the electrical and plumbing, making sure my own kids could safely enjoy what their great-grandfather built. But here's what made this cabin truly special. It was where our family gathered. My sister Elena, she's DEA field operations out in California, always said the lake was the only place she could truly decompress after months undercover. My brother-in-law Garrett, ATF explosives expert, proposed to Elena on that dock during a 4th of July barbecue. Their son Tyler, Coast Guard intelligence analyst, spent every summer learning to read water and weather patterns from his great-grandfather's handwritten fishing logs. We weren't rich, but we were rich in the ways that matter. Enter Vivian Blackthorne, 55, the kind of woman who moved to Pine Lake Estates 3 years ago and immediately started improving everything with the subtle ruthlessness of a corporate restructuring. She'd inherited money from a deceased husband and treated our working-class lake community like her personal renovation project. Always carried this leather portfolio like she was running IBM, speaking in bureaucratic buzzwords that made simple conversations feel like depositions. The smooth texture of those decades-old family photos I keep in a shoebox tells a different story than Vivian's vision of community enhancement. She got herself elected HOA president through what she called an emergency election, which basically meant she showed up to a meeting with 3 of her equally pretentious neighbors while everyone else was at work. The first shot fired came while I was tracking cybercriminals in Detroit. Registered mail, official-looking, the kind that makes your stomach drop. Urgent. Special assessment notice. $847 for emergency dock improvement fees to comply with new maritime safety standards. Here's the thing. The notice was dated 30 days before I received it, due 45 days after that. The math doesn't work when you're deployed and mail forwarding takes time. No community meeting minutes provided, no discussion, no vote that I could find. Just Vivian's flowery signature above a veiled threat about enforcement mechanisms available to ensure community compliance. I called her immediately, got that shrill laugh that sounds like fingernails on chalkboard. Payment deadline is absolute, Mr. Thornfield. The community has voted, and non-compliance simply isn't an option. That's when I started digging. Turns out 6 other longtime residents got identical notices. Funny thing was, they were all blue-collar families or retirees. The mechanic who'd lived here since the 70s. The retired teacher whose husband built their place after Vietnam. The postal worker whose kids grew up swimming off our shared shoreline. Meanwhile, the newer lakefront mansions worth 3 times our modest cabins, mysteriously exempt from these essential safety improvements. The distant sound of loons calling across morning mist used to be my favorite wake-up call at the lake. Now it reminds me of the last peaceful moment before everything went to hell. Because Vivian Blackthorne had just made the biggest mistake of her privileged, power-hungry life. She'd declared war on a family that took oaths to defend this country against enemies both foreign and domestic. And sometimes the domestic ones are the most dangerous. You know what's funny about military banking when you're deployed? Everything takes forever, but somehow it's always your fault when deadlines get missed. I arranged the payment the day I got Vivian's snotty letter $847 via Military Financial Services, which meant routing through 3 different systems, 2 time zones, and one particularly unhelpful sergeant whose overpowering cologne still reminds me of bureaucratic nightmares. The payment hit Pine Lake Estates' HOA account exactly 3 days after Vivian's arbitrary deadline. 3 days. For a fee I'd never heard of. For improvements that didn't exist. On property my family had owned since before this woman drew her first entitled breath. I called to confirm receipt, expecting maybe a grudging acknowledgement. Instead, I got that fingernails-on-chalkboard laugh. "Oh, Mr. Thornfield, I'm afraid you're too late. The violation is already complete." Complete? The money's in your account. Deadline was absolute. The demolition order has been filed with the county. The words hit like a gut punch. Demolition order? Your structure violates our newly updated architectural guidelines. Daily fines of $500 will accrue until the non-compliant structure is removed. She paused, practically purring with satisfaction. I'm sure you understand that community standards must be maintained. Here's something they don't teach you in FBI training. Sometimes the real criminals wear cardigans and carry leather portfolios. Vivian had magically produced architectural guidelines that read like suburban fascism. No structures built before 1990, no rustic aesthetic elements, no buildings that fail to reflect community aspirations. Every single rule laser-targeted working-class family cabins built by people who actually knew which end of a hammer to hold. But 20 years chasing cybercriminals teaches you to dig deeper when something stinks. I requested 2 years of HOA documentation, and what came back was corruption so beautiful it belonged in a textbook. Vivian's emergency election? 4 attendees out of 127 homeowners, scheduled for 2 p.m. on a Tuesday when normal people work for a living. Her architectural committee consisted of herself and 2 neighbors who'd moved in 6 months ago and probably couldn't identify a 2x4 in a lumberyard lineup. Then I found the smoking gun, my grandfather's original property deed, filed in 1963. Back when I was investigating mortgage fraud in Detroit, I'd learned that pre-existing structures have grandfathered protection against retroactive HOA rules. Vivian's little power trip wasn't just morally bankrupt, it was legally impossible under Michigan law. The community reaction told the real story. Ruth, the 78-year-old retired teacher next door, whispered support while checking over her shoulder like the Gestapo might be listening. "She's targeting all the old families, Marcus. The ones who remember when this was a real community, not some country club fantasy." Younger families stayed silent, mortgages making them hostages to property values. The local contractor looked genuinely sick when I cornered him at the hardware store. "She promised me the demolition contract, but this feels wrong. Your grandfather built quality work that'll outlast anything going up today." That evening, I sat in Dad's handmade rocking chair on the screened porch, feeling the scratchy wool of Grandma's Korean war blanket, listening to loons calling across water that didn't give a damn about architectural committees. 3 generations of Thornfields had watched sunsets from this exact spot. My kids had fallen asleep to those loon calls every summer of their lives. Vivian wanted to silence those voices, replace them with the sterile hum of central air and automatic sprinklers, but she'd made one critical error in judgment. See, when you spend your career tracking sophisticated international criminals who think they're smarter than federal law enforcement, you develop certain instincts. You learn to recognize patterns, to spot the tells that separate actual threats from small-time predators who prey on people who can't fight back. Vivian Blackthorne had just revealed herself as the worst kind of criminal, the kind who gets off on destroying things other people built with love and sweat, who mistakes bureaucratic authority for actual power. She thought she was dealing with some simple working stiff who'd fold when the legal paperwork started flying. Instead, she'd just declared war on someone who'd spent 2 decades learning exactly how to dismantle criminal enterprises from the inside out. I pulled out my phone and started making calls. Not to lawyers or civil rights organizations, those would come later. I called my sister Elena in California, my brother-in-law Garrett in Virginia, my nephew Tyler stationed in Florida. Because when someone tries to erase your family's legacy, you don't fight back with strongly worded letters. You fight back with family. And my family happened to carry federal badges and really, really long memories. Game on, Vivian. You picked the wrong cabin to demolish. Vivian didn't waste time celebrating her little victory. 3 days after our phone call, I got a thick manila envelope from Blackstone and Associates, the kind of law firm that charges $800 an hour to send threatening letters on letterhead, so expensive you can smell the arrogance. The letter was a masterpiece of legal intimidation. $12,000 in accumulated violations, 15 days to comply or face property liens, emergency authority to protect community values, potential criminal charges for willful noncompliance with legally binding covenants. But here's what really caught my attention. Buried in the third paragraph was a phrase I'd seen before in mortgage fraud cases: immediate remediation to preserve community investment portfolios. That's not HOA language. That's developer speak. I'd learned during my years tracking financial criminals that the best way to understand any scheme is to follow the money trail. So while Vivian was playing suburban dictator with her fake legal threats, I was doing what I do best, digging into databases most people don't even know exist. FBI agents have access to some interesting resources, and Vivian's background check painted a fascinating picture. Her previous HOA presidency in Chicago had ended under suspicious circumstances, something about missing improvement funds and a very quiet resignation. She'd moved to 3 different lake communities in the past 8 years, each time becoming HOA president, each time targeting working-class families in areas ripe for development. The smell of fresh coffee mixed with determination filled my kitchen as I spread out documents across the table. This wasn't random tyranny. This was a business model. Elena called me back first. My DEA sister has a talent for following money that makes accountants weep with joy. Marcus, I ran her financials. This woman's been moving serious cash through shell companies. Want me to dig deeper? Dig away, but quietly. I think we're looking at something bigger than petty HOA politics. Garrett checked in next, his ATF training making him naturally suspicious of official documents. Those permits she's waving around, half the signatures look questionable. County clerk's office doesn't usually work weekends, but somehow her emergency demolition order got filed on a Sunday. My nephew Tyler called from his Coast Guard intelligence post with the kind of news that makes federal agents smile. Uncle Marcus, remember when you taught me about digital forensics? Well, I may have recovered some accidentally deleted emails from the HOA server. Interesting reading. The recovered emails were pure gold. Vivian's correspondence with someone called Lake Development Solutions painted a clear picture. Force out the undesirable elements, her words, not mine, and flip the properties to buyers who better reflect community aspirations. $15,000 per successfully cleared lot. But the real revelation came when I cross-referenced property assessments with her targeting list. Every single family getting hit with special assessments owned property assessed below the lake average. Every single exempted property was owned by someone who'd moved in within the last 3 years and paid premium prices. This wasn't about community standards. This was about ethnic and economic cleansing, dressed up in architectural guidelines and fake safety concerns. Meanwhile, Vivian was escalating her psychological warfare campaign. She started parking her BMW outside my cabin daily, sitting there taking photos with professional-grade equipment. Always wearing designer sunglasses, always carrying that leather portfolio like she was conducting important business instead of playing pretend prosecutor. The harassment got creative. Certified letters arrived every 3 days with new infractions. My mailbox was 2 inches too close to the road. My dock needed structural engineering assessment. My outdoor grill violated fire safety protocols. Each letter carried the same veiled threat about enforcement mechanisms and community values. She even recruited some newer residents to file complaints. Suddenly, my cabin was causing property value concerns and disrupting neighborhood harmony. Amazing how people who'd never spoken to me before developed strong opinions about architectural authenticity. But the masterstroke was her fake neighborhood Facebook group, Pine Lake Community Standards, where she posted photos of my cabin with commentary about declining property maintenance and non-compliance issues affecting everyone's investment. I'd seen this playbook before in financial fraud investigations. Isolate the target, build false legitimacy through manufactured community pressure, then move in for the kill when the victim feels helpless and alone. What Vivian didn't understand was that federal agents don't get helpless. We get methodical. I started documenting everything. Every photo she took, every letter she sent, every manufactured complaint from her recruited neighbors. In cybercrime investigations, we call this building the pattern, showing that seemingly random events are actually coordinated attacks, and the pattern was becoming crystal clear. Vivian Blackthorne wasn't some overzealous Homeowner Association president. She was a professional community disruptor, systematically targeting working families to clear property for development profit. She'd picked the wrong family to target and the wrong federal agent to underestimate, because while she was playing small-town dictator, I was building a federal case that would make her fake legal threats look like children's crayon drawings. Time to show her what real authority looks like. Sometimes evil doesn't announce itself with dramatic music and villainous monologues. Sometimes it shows up at 6 a.m. with bulldozers and a woman in a cream-colored pantsuit holding a clipboard like she's directing a symphony. Vivian had played her nuclear card with surgical precision. While I was stuck in federal court testifying about cryptocurrency fraud, a case I couldn't reschedule without compromising a 2-year investigation, she'd obtained an emergency demolition permit through what I can only describe as bureaucratic sleight of hand. The call came from Ruth during my lunch break. Her voice was shaking so badly I could barely understand her. "Marcus, oh God, they're here. The bulldozers are here." "What bulldozers?" She said the cabin poses imminent danger. There's a structural engineer with fake-looking credentials, police cars, and Vivian's got a camera crew filming everything for HOA records and insurance purposes. I felt my blood turn to ice water. "Ruth, get inside and lock your doors. I'm coming." The 2-hour drive from Detroit to Pine Lake felt like crossing dimensions into hell. Every red light, every slow truck, every construction zone felt like deliberate torture designed to keep me from saving 60 years of family history. But I was already too late. The smell hit me first. Diesel fuel mixed with fresh sawdust, hydraulic fluid, and something else I couldn't identify until I realized it was the scent of my childhood being ground into splinters. The deafening roar of heavy machinery drowned out everything, even the birds that usually sang from the old oak trees my grandfather had planted. My family's cabin, where 3 generations had learned to fish, where my parents had their first dance as newlyweds, where my kids had carved their names into the door frame every summer, was already half gone. Vivian stood 20 feet away, designer sunglasses reflecting the destruction, pointing and gesturing to her camera operator like she was hosting some twisted home improvement show. She was actually narrating the demolition, her voice carrying over the machinery noise with sick enthusiasm. And here you can see the structural deficiencies that posed such a danger to our community. Notice how the foundation work doesn't meet current standards. This is exactly why our new architectural guidelines are so important for property values and safety. The operator looked uncomfortable, probably wondering why this woman seemed so gleeful about destroying someone's home. The police officers standing nearby kept checking their phones, clearly wanting to be anywhere else but supervising what was obviously a civil matter that had somehow gotten elevated to emergency status. I photographed everything, every angle, every piece of equipment, every face. The bulldozer operator actually stopped working when he saw me, his expression shifting from professional concentration to something that looked like shame. He knew this wasn't right. But the most damning evidence was Vivian herself. While I stood there watching 60 years of family memories get crushed into debris, she kept filming, kept celebrating, kept providing commentary about necessary community improvements and protecting everyone's investment. She was enjoying this. Not just satisfied with winning, she was genuinely thrilled to be destroying something that meant everything to someone else. The demolition took 4 hours. 4 hours to erase my grandfather's Korean War recovery project, my father's weekend carpentry dreams, my own careful electrical work, and my children's entire summer universe. The dock that my dad built, the one where Garrett proposed to Elena during that 4th of July barbecue, got pulled down despite being on my private shoreline, not community property. Every family photo still hanging on the walls, every fishing rod in the closet, every board game we'd played during rainy afternoons, every quilt my grandmother had sewn during long winter evenings, all of it crushed and loaded into industrial dumpsters like garbage. The hollow thud of my grandfather's hand-carved cedar chest hitting the dumpster bottom still echoes in my nightmares. But in the rubble, I found something that changed everything. A fragment of my grandfather's Purple Heart display case, the glass cracked but the metal still somehow gleaming in the afternoon sun. He'd earned that medal taking shrapnel in Korea, defending American values against people who believed might makes right. Standing there holding that fragment, breathing air thick with sawdust and diesel fumes, listening to Vivian's triumphant commentary about community improvement, I realized this wasn't just about property disputes or HOA overreach. This was about America. About whether working families who build things with their own hands deserve to keep what they've earned, or whether money and fake authority can simply erase them when it's convenient. Vivian had made this personal, but looking at my grandfather's Purple Heart in that pile of destruction, I understood it was bigger than personal. This was about every family facing down petty tyrants who think legal letterhead equals moral authority. Time to call in the cavalry, not lawyers or civil rights groups, federal cavalry, because Vivian Blackthorne had just declared war on the wrong American family, and we always fight back. 3 days after the demolition, Elena called with the kind of news that makes federal agents reach for their handcuffs. "Marcus, you need to sit down for this. I've been running financial analysis on your HOA, and it's not just corruption, it's a goddamn criminal enterprise." I was sitting in my temporary RV, parked where my family cabin used to stand, staring at the pile of debris that used to be my childhood. The insurance company was giving me the runaround, claiming demolition by legitimate authority wasn't covered under standard policies. "Talk to me, Elena." $47,000 in special assessments collected over 18 months. I found receipts for exactly $12,000 in actual improvements, and most of those were inflated contractor bills from the same 3 companies. The math was simple and ugly. $35,000 had simply vanished into something called Pine Lake Property Solutions LLC, a shell company that existed only on paper and in Vivian's bank account. "Gets better," Elena continued. Property Solutions LLC was supposedly owned by Vivian's deceased husband, except he died 2 years ago, and she's been signing checks to herself for administrative oversight ever since. Classic embezzlement, but with a federal twist, she's been using mail and wire transfers to move the money. That's when Tyler's Coast Guard intelligence training proved invaluable. Kid had recovered deleted emails that painted a picture so clear it belonged in a prosecution handbook. Vivian's correspondence with Lakefront Development Associates revealed the real scheme. Phase 1. Remove undesirable legacy families through targeted enforcement. Phase 2. Acquire properties at below-market prices. Phase 3. Resell to approved buyers who reflect community aspirations. Translation: force out working-class families, steal their property through fake legal mechanisms, then flip it to rich people who won't ask uncomfortable questions. But the smoking gun was an email dated 6 months ago. Thornfield property represents highest value target due to prime lakefront positioning and owners' frequent absences. Federal deployment schedules provide optimal timing for remediation. She'd been planning this for months, watching my deployment schedule, timing her fake assessments to coincide with my absence, calculating exactly how to steal my family's legacy while I was serving my country. The federal crimes were stacking up like cordwood. Mail fraud for using postal service to send fake assessment notices, wire fraud for electronic fund transfers to shell companies, conspiracy for coordinating with developers across state lines, and potentially RICO violations if this pattern extended beyond Pine Lake. Garrett's ATF investigation had uncovered the broader network. Similar schemes in 12 communities across 3 states, always targeting veteran families and working-class homeowners in areas marked for development potential. Total estimated fraud, $2.3 million over 8 years. "This isn't some crazy HOA president," Garrett explained during our family conference call. "This is organized crime hiding behind suburban legitimacy. Vivian's a professional community disruptor. She gets hired to clear out problematic residents so developers can move in." The pattern was always the same. Move into established community, get elected HOA president through emergency elections, create retroactive rules targeting specific families, escalate until they're forced to sell or abandon their property, then mysteriously resign once the cleanup is complete. My grandfather's Purple Heart fragment suddenly felt heavier in my hand. This wasn't just about my cabin anymore. This was about 47 families across 3 states who'd been systematically robbed by a woman who treated American working families like obstacles to profit. But Vivian had made one critical error. She'd targeted a federal law enforcement family with the resources, training, and absolute determination to expose her entire operation. Time to show her what happens when petty criminals mess with people who actually understand how justice works. The federal investigation was about to begin in earnest. Elena's DEA safe house outside Grand Rapids smelled like strong coffee and determination. The kitchen table disappeared under stacks of financial records, property documents, and surveillance photos that would make any prosecutor weep with joy. My family doesn't do casual conversations when someone declares war on us. We do tactical briefings. "All right, people," I said, spreading out the evidence like a federal task force commander. Vivian Blackthorne just made the mistake of targeting a family where everyone carries badges and nobody forgets an injustice. Elena had flown in from California with a banker's box full of financial forensics that read like a crime novel. $2.3 million embezzled across 4 states over 8 years. She's not just stealing HOA fees, she's running a sophisticated money laundering operation through multiple shell companies. The pattern was beautiful in its criminal elegance. Vivian would infiltrate established communities, manufacture emergencies to justify special assessments, then funnel the money through fake companies owned by her conveniently deceased husband. The remaining funds got kicked back to developers who promised her $15,000 per successfully cleared lot. "Here's what makes this federal," Elena continued, pointing to a flowchart that looked like an organized crime family tree. Mail fraud for fake assessment notices, wire fraud for interstate money transfers, conspiracy for coordinating with developers across state lines, and RICO violations for operating a continuing criminal enterprise. Garrett brought his ATF expertise to bear on the documentation side. 23 years investigating explosive devices teaches you to spot fake permits and forged documents from across the room. Half the emergency orders she's been waving around are fraudulent. County clerks don't work weekends, but somehow her paperwork gets processed on Sundays with signatures that don't match official exemplars. He'd also contacted our Detroit FBI field office about the interstate conspiracy angle. When federal agents start comparing notes across jurisdictions, patterns emerge that local authorities miss. Same contractor network in all 4 targeted communities, same law firm handling all the threatening letters, same shell company structure in every location. Tyler's Coast Guard intelligence background made him our digital forensics specialist. Kid had recovered enough deleted emails to keep prosecutors busy for months. "She's got a whole network, Uncle Marcus. Real estate agents who identify target properties, lawyers who create fake legal pressure, contractors who provide inflated improvement estimates, and county officials who expedite permits for the right price." But the real goldmine was her communications with something called Heritage Community Solutions, a consulting firm that specialized in demographic transition management for lakefront properties. Translation: they helped rich developers steal land from working families using legal-sounding theft. This is bigger than Pine Lake, I realized, studying Tyler's network analysis. She's a professional community cleaner, gets hired to remove undesirable elements so developers can flip entire neighborhoods to wealthy buyers. Our strategy had to be surgical. Build an airtight federal case while appearing to pursue normal civil remedies. Let Vivian think she'd won while we documented every criminal act. Protect other families from her retaliation while gathering evidence that would put her away for decades. Elena would handle the financial forensics, following money trails through offshore accounts and shell companies. Her DEA experience with drug money laundering made her uniquely qualified to unravel complex financial schemes. Garrett would coordinate with federal prosecutors, presenting the case as organized racketeering rather than simple HOA disputes. His ATF background with interstate firearms trafficking gave him credibility with U.S. attorney offices across multiple jurisdictions. Tyler would maintain digital surveillance, monitoring communications, and recovering deleted files. Coast Guard intelligence training made him expert at pattern analysis and network mapping. My job was building the civil rights angle while coordinating with FBI Cyber Crimes Division. Systematic targeting of veteran families constituted federal discrimination violations. Using mail and internet to coordinate the scheme made it cyber-enabled organized crime. We also needed community allies. Ruth had agreed to provide historical HOA documentation going back to the original community charter. The hardware store owner was ready to testify about Vivian's attempts to bribe local contractors. The retired teacher had found discrepancies in Vivian's credentials and references that suggested identity fraud. But the most important element was patience. Rush a federal case and defense attorneys find procedural holes. Take time to build overwhelming evidence and criminals have no escape routes. She thinks she destroyed our family legacy, I said, looking around the table at 3 generations of federal law enforcement. What she actually did was give us a federal case that'll send her to prison for the next 20 years. Elena raised her coffee mug. To Grandpa's Purple Heart and the justice he fought for. To family, Garrett added. To taking down criminals who prey on American working families, Tyler finished. The click-clack of keyboards and rustle of evidence files filled Elena's kitchen as we coordinated our federal response to Vivian's declaration of war. Game on. But this time, we were playing by federal rules. And in federal court, justice has a very long memory. Predators have excellent instincts for when they're being hunted. 3 weeks after the demolition, Vivian's behavior shifted from triumphant dictator to paranoid criminal watching shadows. She'd noticed things. Federal vehicles occasionally parked near Pine Lake, unmarked sedans that screamed law enforcement to anyone who knew what to look for. Ruth had started asking pointed questions about HOA financial records during community meetings. The hardware store owner suddenly stopped returning her calls about contractor recommendations. Most telling of all, I hadn't filed the expected civil lawsuit. Any normal homeowner facing wrongful demolition would be buried in legal paperwork by now, fighting through civil courts for compensation. My silence was making her nervous. So she did what cornered criminals always do, she escalated. The smear campaign started on social media, Facebook posts claiming I'd made violent threats during our phone conversations, anonymous comments on neighborhood forums about unstable veteran behavior and government surveillance intimidation. She was trying to paint me as the dangerous one, the threat to community safety. But Vivian's real creativity showed in her anonymous letters to neighbors. Typed on generic office paper delivered at night, warning about federal agents conducting illegal surveillance and dangerous confrontations with armed veterans suffering from PTSD. The sour smell of fear sweat on her during our brief encounters told me she was writing those letters in a state of pure panic. Her desperation peaked when she filed false police reports claiming I'd threatened her physically during a community meeting we'd never actually had. 3 separate complaints to county sheriff, state police, and local FBI field office about intimidation by federal agents exceeding their authority. What Vivian didn't understand was that false reports against federal agents trigger automatic investigations. Every single complaint got forwarded to internal affairs divisions that take threats against law enforcement very seriously. Her lies weren't protecting her. They were creating federal evidence of obstruction. The break-in attempt was her biggest mistake yet. Garrett's ATF surveillance cameras caught everything. A security consultant from Chicago, hired to search my RV for evidence that the family was building a federal case. Professional burglar tools, electronic surveillance equipment, and enough criminal experience to make this conspiracy rather than simple trespassing. The guy's background check read like a greatest hits album of federal violations. Wire fraud, identity theft, interstate transportation of stolen property, and previous work for real estate developers in property acquisition disputes. Vivian had just hired a federal felon to commit more federal felonies. But my favorite part was watching him work. Garrett's cameras captured 47 minutes of professional breaking and entering, complete with audio of the consultant calling his employer to report progress. The feds got nothing visible here, but his family's definitely coordinating something. You should probably speed up your timeline. Speed up the timeline? She was planning something bigger. The harassment campaign expanded to include Ruth and other supportive neighbors. Anonymous phone calls at 2 a.m. warning about property values declining due to federal investigation. Fake HOA violation notices for Ruth's garden decorations and the postal workers' boat dock. Threatening letters about community members who aid and abet government overreach. She even tried bribing the county clerk to lose HOA financial records. Offered him $5,000 cash to claim the documents had been misfiled or accidentally destroyed during office renovations. The clerk, a 20-year government employee, immediately reported the attempted bribery to county prosecutors. Meanwhile, I was documenting every desperate act for federal prosecutors who were probably having the easiest case-building experience of their careers. Each escalation added new charges to an already overwhelming criminal indictment. The mechanical whir of hidden surveillance cameras became the soundtrack to Vivian's descent into criminal panic. Every conversation recorded, every bribery attempt documented, every false police report creating additional federal violations. But the community was transforming around her desperation. Ruth had found her voice, openly challenging HOA decisions during meetings. Younger families started asking questions about where their assessment money was actually going. The hardware store owner began sharing stories about Vivian's attempts to recruit him for fake improvement projects. Local media picked up on the tension. Lakefront community divided over HOA enforcement became federal investigation targets local HOA leader as reporters started connecting dots between demolished cabins and missing community funds. Vivian's nervous energy at community gatherings was crackling like static electricity. She'd fidget with her expensive watch, avoid eye contact, and stumble through explanations that made less sense each time. Her leather portfolio, once a prop of intimidation, now contained mostly blank pages and desperate notes about legal strategies and damage control. The smell of her overpowering vanilla perfume had taken on an undertone of desperation sweat. Even her BMW seemed to idle differently outside my RV-less predatory surveillance, more anxious circling. She knew the federal net was tightening, but she couldn't stop digging herself deeper into criminal liability. Time for the final act. The grand jury subpoenas arrived on a Tuesday morning like federal thunderbolts, each one carrying the full weight of United States law enforcement behind official government seals. Pine Lake Estates HOA received theirs first 2 years of financial records, all correspondence with property management companies, and complete documentation of every special assessment levied since Vivian's emergency election. The paralegal who delivered it looked like he was serving a death warrant, which in a way, he was. Pine Lake Property Solutions LLC got hit simultaneously. Bank records, wire transfer documentation, contractor payments, and all correspondence with real estate developers. The shell company that had seemed so clever when Vivian was stealing money suddenly looked like evidence exhibit number 1 in a federal racketeering case. But the real earthquake hit when FBI agents knocked on the door of Lakefront Development Associates in Chicago. Search warrant in hand, federal authority behind them, and 2 years' worth of interstate conspiracy evidence guiding their investigation. My nephew Tyler's Coast Guard intelligence training had provided the roadmap for dismantling their entire network. 12 communities across 3 states, 47 targeted families, and $2.3 million in documented fraud. What had started as revenge for my demolished cabin had become a federal task force investigation into organized community theft. Vivian's panic reached new heights when local banks froze every account connected to her operation. The fresh smell of autumn air mixing with her desperation became the signature scent of Pine Lake community meetings, where she'd arrive looking like she'd slept in her car and forgotten how to use makeup. Her attempts to flee to the Cayman Islands lasted exactly 6 hours. Tyler's Coast Guard contacts monitor international travel by persons under federal investigation, and Vivian's passport got flagged the moment she tried to book a flight. Nothing says consciousness of guilt like attempting to flee the country when federal subpoenas start flying. The destruction of evidence phase was almost comical. Vivian spent 3 days feeding documents into a home shredder that wasn't designed for industrial-scale cover-up operations. Unfortunately for her, federal obstruction charges don't care if your criminal equipment breaks down halfway through destroying evidence. That's when she made her final desperate play, a $50,000 settlement offer delivered through her increasingly nervous attorney. My client wishes to avoid any misunderstandings about community management practices, the lawyer explained during our brief meeting. This generous settlement reflects her desire to move forward without unnecessary legal complications. $50,000 to pretend systematic embezzlement and criminal conspiracy were just misunderstandings. The offer was insulting, but also perfect evidence of consciousness of guilt for federal prosecutors building their case. Meanwhile, the media attention was snowballing beyond local news into national coverage. Federal Family Battle's HOA tyrant became nationwide investigation exposes community theft ring as reporters discovered the scope of Vivian's criminal enterprise. Veterans groups rallied around the story of a deployed soldier's family cabin being demolished while he served his country. Social media hashtag Justice for Thornfield went viral. with thousands of families sharing their own HOA horror stories and demanding federal investigation of community association abuse. The electric hum of news cameras became Pine Lake's new background noise, replacing the peaceful sounds of loons and lapping water with the mechanical buzz of satellite trucks and broadcast equipment. Federal prosecutors were having the easiest case-building experience of their careers. Every desperate act Vivian committed created additional charges: wire fraud for the money transfers, mail fraud for the fake assessments, obstruction for destroying evidence, conspiracy for coordinating with developers, RICO violations for operating a continuing criminal enterprise. But my favorite moment came when she tried to turn other neighbors against my family by claiming we were conducting illegal federal surveillance of the community. 3 families actually called FBI field offices to report suspicious government activity, which immediately triggered federal interviews where they learned about Vivian's criminal enterprise and offered to testify against her. The community transformation was remarkable. Ruth had become a fearless advocate for HOA transparency, demanding open meetings and financial accountability. The hardware store owner was openly telling customers about Vivian's bribery attempts. Even younger families who'd stayed silent during the demolition were now asking pointed questions about where their assessment money had gone. Property values actually increased as the corruption was exposed. Turns out buyers prefer communities where HOA presidents aren't embezzling funds and targeting families for ethnic cleansing. Who knew? Vivian's final weeks of freedom were spent in increasingly frantic damage control. Meetings with expensive attorneys who kept withdrawing from her case as the federal evidence mounted. Attempts to blame everything on her deceased husband, as if dead men could sign checks and coordinate multi-state criminal enterprises. The solid weight of my FBI badge felt heavier during our final confrontations, knowing that federal justice was finally closing in on someone who'd made a career of destroying American families. All we needed now was the perfect stage for her final downfall. And county commissioners had just called an emergency community meeting to address ongoing concerns about HOA governance and federal investigation findings. Time for the grand finale. The Pine Lake Community Center hadn't seen this much excitement since the 4th of July festival when Old Pete's fireworks accidentally set the dock on fire. But tonight's crowd wasn't here for entertainment, they were here for justice. County commissioners had called an emergency meeting to address ongoing concerns about HOA governance practices and federal investigation findings. Translation: Vivian's criminal empire was about to get publicly dismantled in front of half the county. The parking lot looked like a law enforcement convention. Local media trucks lined Lakeshore Drive, their satellite dishes reaching toward heaven like electronic prayers for justice. Veterans groups had driven in from 3 counties wearing their unit patches and carrying American flags. HOA reform advocates sat with notebooks and recording equipment, ready to document every word for their national databases. And scattered throughout the crowd, positioned with military precision, sat my federal family. Elena near the back exit, Garrett by the side door, Tyler with his laptop recording everything for the official investigation file. We looked like ordinary concerned citizens, but Vivian's nervous glances kept finding our faces in the crowd. She arrived 10 minutes late, flanked by an expensive attorney who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else on earth. Her usually perfect hair was slightly disheveled, her designer outfit wrinkled, and that leather portfolio she'd carried like a weapon now clutched against her chest like armor. The sweet smell of victory was already mixing with her bitter perfume and obvious fear sweat. County Commissioner Williams called for order and immediately yielded the floor to Assistant U.S. Attorney Jennifer Rodriguez, whose presence sent murmurs through the crowd. Federal prosecutors don't attend HOA meetings unless serious crimes are involved. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience during this difficult period. The United States Attorney's Office has been conducting an investigation into allegations of mail fraud, wire fraud, conspiracy, and racketeering involving the Pine Lake Estates Homeowners Association. Vivian's lawyer immediately stood up. Commissioner Williams, my client objects to this public discussion of ongoing legal matters. She has constitutional rights that your client waived those rights when she chose to operate a criminal enterprise in our community, Rodriguez interrupted smoothly. This is a public meeting about public corruption, and the public has a right to know. Williams nodded toward me. Mr. Thornfield, would you like to address the community about your family's experience? I stood slowly, feeling the weight of my grandfather's Purple Heart fragment in my pocket and the eyes of 200 neighbors on my face. Time for the revelation, that would change everything. Thank you, Commissioner Williams. For those who don't know me, I'm Marcus Thornfield. My family's cabin was demolished 3 months ago while I was deployed with the FBI, serving federal warrants in Detroit. The murmur that went through the crowd was electric. Several people turned to stare at Vivian, whose face had gone pale as she realized what was coming. That's right, FBI. Special Agent Marcus Thornfield, Cybercrimes Division. My sister Elena is DEA Field Operations. My brother-in-law Garrett works ATF Explosives. My nephew Tyler is Coast Guard Intelligence. We're a federal law enforcement family, and Vivian Blackthorne just made the mistake of targeting us with a multi-state criminal conspiracy. Elena stood and displayed her DEA credentials. Garrett followed with his ATF badge. Tyler held up his Coast Guard Intelligence identification. The community center went dead silent except for the mechanical whir of news cameras capturing every moment. Over the past 3 months, our family has documented systematic embezzlement totaling $2.3 million across 12 communities in 3 states. Mail fraud, wire fraud, conspiracy to commit theft, obstruction of federal investigation, and RICO violations for operating a continuing criminal enterprise. I pulled out a folder thick with evidence and placed it on the podium. Financial records showing Pine Lake Property Solutions, LLC, owned by Ms. Blackthorne, embezzling $35,000 in fake special assessments. Email correspondence with developers planning to clear out undesirable elements like veteran families. Audio recordings of her celebrating the demolition of my grandfather's cabin, built by a Purple Heart recipient who fought in Korea. The sharp click of handcuffs echoed through the silent room as federal marshals moved into position. Rodriguez nodded toward Vivian, who was frantically whispering with her attorney. Vivian Blackthorne, you're under arrest for mail fraud, wire fraud, conspiracy, and violation of the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act. You have the right to remain silent. The crowd erupted in sustained applause as handcuffs closed around wrists that had signed fake demolition orders and embezzled community funds. Ruth stood first, tears streaming down her face, followed by every family that had been targeted by Vivian's criminal enterprise. Her expensive lawyer was already distancing himself, gathering papers and heading for the exit, while his former client got processed for federal crimes. That's what happens, I said into the microphone as federal marshals led her away, when petty criminals mess with American families who actually understand how justice works. The sweet sound of justice being served mixed with grateful handshakes and the warm pressure of community healing. Federal badges carry weight, but family legacy carries more. 6 months later, Pine Lake looked like a completely different place. Not because of fancy renovations or corporate development schemes, but because a community had remembered what it meant to stand together against people who prey on working families. The federal asset forfeiture process moved with the beautiful efficiency that only comes when federal prosecutors build airtight cases. Vivian's stolen funds plus penalties and interest returned to Pine Lake Estates faster than her fake legal threats had arrived. $215,000 back to families who'd been systematically robbed by a woman who treated their life savings like her personal shopping fund. Vivian's lakefront mansion, purchased with embezzled community funds, sold at auction for enough money to fund every legitimate improvement Pine Lake actually needed. Real dock safety equipment, updated electrical for the community center, and a proper road maintenance fund that didn't require mysterious special assessments targeting families who could barely afford groceries. The community fundraiser to rebuild my family cabin raised $85,000 in 3 weeks. Local contractors donated labor, the lumber yard provided materials at cost, and neighbors showed up every weekend with sandwiches, tools, and determination to restore what one criminal had tried to erase. The new cabin honored my grandfather's original design while meeting every legitimate safety code. Same hand-selected pine logs, same screened porch for card games during storms, same dock for teaching kids proper knots, but now with modern systems that'll last another 60 years of family memories. That first family reunion brought healing tears and the return of loon calls across morning mist. My kids carved their names in the new door frame right next to their great-grandfather's restored initials, continuing a tradition that no HOA tyrant could ever truly destroy. The excess recovered funds created something my grandfather would have loved, the Pine Lake Veterans Scholarship. Annual awards for military families pursuing education, because knowledge is the best defense against criminals who count on ignorance and intimidation. Ruth became our first scholarship committee chairwoman, approaching the job with the same fierce determination she'd shown standing up to Vivian. Education is how we make sure this never happens again, she declared at the dedication ceremony, her voice strong as steel. Federal impact extended nationwide. Congressional hearings on HOA reform, FBI task force creation for organized community fraud, and new legal protections for homeowners facing discriminatory enforcement. My House subcommittee testimony felt like completing my grandfather's service defending American families against domestic enemies hiding behind fake authority. Here's what we learned that you can use. Always demand transparent HOA financial records. They're public documents you have every right to see. If special assessments seem targeted or discriminatory, document everything and contact your state attorney general. Pre-existing structures often have grandfathered protection against retroactive rules, so check your property's original deed date against HOA establishment. Most importantly, federal fair housing laws apply to HOA actions. Systematic targeting based on economic status, veteran status, or family composition violates federal civil rights statutes that carry serious criminal penalties. Vivian's fate? 15 years federal prison, $3.2 million in restitution, and permanent ban from any HOA involvement upon release. Her Chicago accomplices got 8 to 12 years each, and the entire demographic transition management industry suddenly found itself under federal microscopes. But my favorite justice came from unexpected places. Property values actually increased after the corruption exposure. Turns out buyers prefer communities where presidents don't embezzle funds or target families for economic cleansing. The annual Thornfield Day Festival celebrates every family's right to keep what they've built through honest work. Last Tuesday brought a familiar envelope. Another military family near Fort Hood describing identical patterns of HOA harassment targeting veteran communities. The federal task force is expanding, and it looks like we're going to stay busy protecting American families from domestic criminals who've forgotten this country belongs to people who build things, not steal them. Personal healing came in unexpected moments. Sarah, the local teacher who'd supported us throughout the ordeal, became my wife in a lakeside ceremony where 3 generations of federal agents danced to music that floated across water that doesn't care about architectural committees or community standards. The sound of children's laughter echoing across Pine Lake during our first summer back proved that some victories create legacies stronger than any criminal can destroy. Ready for your own justice story? Share your HOA nightmare in the comments below. You might be part of a larger criminal pattern we can help expose. Hit that subscribe button on Karen's Stories for more tales where working families outsmart corrupt systems and petty tyrants get exactly what they deserve. Ring that notification bell because justice never sleeps and neither do we. Total 8,004 words.